with some principles and guidelines. Now, I have to admit that in so doing, we found the helpfulness of what we had done earlier with the principles and guidelines for the protection of Indigenous heritage. We adopted some of those principles, added some of our own, and developed then the responsibilities of researchers and developed the responsibilities for our community in terms of how we were going to deal with those things. And then we brought those back to the Grand Council, and they liked it, approved it, and then said, oh, you did so well, now I'm going to put you on a committee and you're going to, for life now, be reading proposals. Now that's, you know, one of the things I get to be, you know, and that's when the elders say you have a thing to do, a responsibility to do, that's what I get to do. And even I'm in Saskatoon, I get to read all the proposals that are going on in our territory, and I get to read them. But I'm not alone. I have a whole group of us who have been so assigned to this task, and we read them, and after those have been read, decisions made, and the work is then brought into the Cape Breton University, where it is the administrators for the Ethics Watch, as we call it. And I give you the website for that. And if you were to go to the Mi'kmaq Ethics Watch, like many of the people around in Canada, we have picked up, a lot of people have picked up on our approach and added their own to it and have begun to use this as a process. Now, this means that what we do is volunteer, it's what we do for the collective and for the community, and so there is no monies that come to us to do any of this kind of work, so our Indigenous institutions then support us in the work that we are doing in terms of making sure that the research that's going on in our communities, that everyone is made aware of that research, and as well that that research is done in a manner, in a way that is appropriate to our communities. In all of the research proposals that we did, we refused 3 research proposals completely, although 2 of them redid them and have made way to get those approved, although we still have one that's outstanding. So what it means in terms of it, and what I'm trying to say to you is that, you know, exercise and self-determination is not about what one gives to you. It isn't what one funds you to do. It is what you, within your group, within your leadership, decide is important to do, and you do it. And so this is the work that you need to do in terms of exercising control over all the research conducted in your territories, and identifying the protocols for engaging in respectful research and dialogue in those communities, and identifying an effective mechanism for reviewing that research that comes into your community, and identifying responsible community members who will be able to do this kind of work, because for us a large of it is done by internet in terms of people sending us all of this information. We don't do a whole lot of paper, but we do a lot of internet work. And so this is the kind of thing that helps us to work on this, and we build on being timely and responsible in those reviews. I just want to, for those of you who are here, are tribal leaders, I say you need to educate your communities and the elders to the principles of both, whether they're in the protection of Indigenous heritage or whether they are in the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that has now, since 2007, been ratified by 143 countries. And Canada just 2 weeks ago approved that, so it adds their list, and so the ones that have not approved it is the U.S., New Zealand, and Australia. Although I think Australia is coming around too. We need to lobby and politicize research as sites of transformation and empowerment, and that this is a way of developing notions of ownership, control, access, and possession of research data, information, and dissemination. And we need to advise our institutions, university institutions, that no longer will they be able to do research in our communities without first going through our own research door. No community is, they have to go through their own research ethics proposals in their communities and in their institutions, but they have to go through ours as well. And sometimes they go through 3 doors or 4 doors. For example, if you're doing health research, you have a health door, you have a university door, and then you have the community door. And those are 3 doors that everyone has to go through before they can take and have their research approved. For university researchers, it means that we need to engage that ethical space for research. We need to accept Indigenous people's jurisdiction of their culture, their heritage, their knowledge, and their political and intellectual domains. Those are the rights that have been articulated in the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. If you haven't read it, I invite you to do so. It's an amazing piece. It's the work of Indigenous peoples in the last 20 years that there's been this work going on. They did it for 10 years and it wasn't approved, and the states then took over, and then they went through another 10 years of doing that. So it's been a long process. And then, it's important that we also acknowledge Indigenous theory and method, that Indigenous theory does draw from Indigenous languages, from our worldviews, and they also represent a method and way of doing things. And so we need to be recognizing that those are legitimate places where we would use Indigenous theory and methods. We need to have universities review policies of academic freedom, of research, to determine if they confer unearned advantage and dominance in terms of how they are looking at Indigenous peoples. We need to address the conflicts between research ethic boards and the ethical requirements among Indigenous peoples. That part I noted earlier about the ethical space, when we bring the 2 groups together, that dialogue needs to occur, because there's very different ways of doing things from within our Indigenous context as are done within our Western or United States institutions. And we need to find a mechanism in those universities to educate the university personnel, their teachers, their faculty, their research boards, and so on, about the importance of doing respectful research within our communities. Now, what it means for those who are no review boards themselves or a faculty advisor, we need to have you listen and understand and accept, value and support Aboriginal communities' perspectives, protocols, needs, and goals in the research process. We need to be also flexible, recognizing that there are different ways of getting consent. Maybe the consent is like the tobacco exchange, cloth tobacco. A gift might be and once you accept the tobacco, that is your consent. That is your assent to work in that relationship. And so this process of reading the consent form and having it signed and read by the person might not be the right way for doing it. So there needs to be some negotiation about how that can be achieved. And then finally, we need to look for the methodologies and the cultural protocols that fit with research goals. Some of those methodologies that would be appropriate are importantly for those that are dealing with Indigenous knowledge issues. What are then the appropriate ways to take up Indigenous knowledge? For example, the kinds of research that Narcissus and Ryan were talking about this morning were the very kind of research of going in, sitting on the land, and feeling the land, or going to a ceremony, or going to a sweat, and so on, that these are research processes, but they are also part of how one engages Indigenous knowledge. For the researchers, you need to recognize the need for translation across cultures, and an interpretation that needs to be had, that you have a certain kind of way of speaking within the institution that is very different from that which is in the community. And there must be a translation to them across the community. So unlike that article, the IDRC that had the fellow who gave the article to the women, that is not the appropriate way of passing back knowledge to them. That there has to be another way, and maybe also it must go with the exchange of some gifts and